The destruction of New York City has always been an emblem and icon of the end of the world. However, Myanmar's destruction, not so much. But it's more realistic, as it is currently going on. Indeed, according to a Washington Post report dated August 13th, 2013, the destruction that has recently gone on in Myanmar is equivalent to that of 3 destructions of the entire New York City. And this poses a significant threat, as media coverage has eluded this factor, whereas if it were in New York City, this would be a completely different story. So, it also poses a significant threat of our morals. With recent religious violence going on in Myanmar, or as it's more commonly known, Burma, between Muslims and Buddhists, it clearly poses a threat on the national security of the country. And therefore, new government officials elected recently have to in fact act upon this in the most diligent manner. And that poses today's question asked to us by the New York Times, dated just yesterday. How should the government of Burma, or rather Myanmar, deal with an increase in religious violence? And the answer to this is by adding austerity in 3 possible areas. First, by regulating and mitigating the abilities of the media. Secondly, by ousting dogmatic leaders of terrorist, quote-unquote terrorist groups of both Muslims and Buddhists. And lastly, and arguably most important, by looking towards foreign influence in Bangladesh. But first, we have to realize that it is critical that the government of Burma, or Myanmar, acts in the following way by mitigating the abilities of media. Indeed, according to a study done by the Foreign Affairs, dated August 10th, 2013, the government of Burma needs to regulate the media, as bias has actually been provoked. Indeed, although these sources claim to be unbiased, the situation to them is leaning more towards the Buddhists' favor and anti-Muslim sentiment. And this, in the long term, is going to harm the overall, the ability of amalgamation of the country itself. Indeed, unification and conformity is, in the long term, a large idea, if in fact nothing is done to mitigate the media's regulation, or rather to increase the media's regulation. Indeed, according to a Washington Post report dated August 11th, 2013, the government, or rather, this isn't beneficial for Buddhists either, as this raises propaganda for Muslims and ultimately adds to a more polarized aura in the country itself. And therefore, it is essential that the country deals with the problem by having the government mitigate the abilities of the media. And although this may seem anti-democratic, it is in the interests of Burma, as democracy isn't in their best interests currently. But secondly, we have to realize that the government has to oust leaders, not centralized groups. And the reason for this is outlined on a foreign policy report dated May 2nd, 2013. The reports that while the government of Burma is focusing on groups themselves, the groups aren't centralized and don't have headquarters in Burma, and therefore it is much more difficult to look for. However, the article goes on to elaborate that elitist leaders are ultimately executives and therefore have the ability to regulate the entire system. Without their leaders, quite frankly, they don't have the power. Quite frankly, it is the tipping stone, and that would be their best shot by acting on these powerhouses of the leaders themselves and not the groups. Indeed, according to a report done by the New York Times dated August 2nd, 2013, it's easier to find the leaders than the groups themselves. And on top of it, it would add as propaganda for the groups. Once you kill off one, 3 more appear, as the article goes on to elaborate. And therefore, it is in their best interest to focus on the leaders of the groups both Muslim and Buddhist, rather than focusing on a centralized group, as this only becomes more provocative. Now, lastly, we have to realize that in the long term, it's beneficial for them to look towards Bangladesh for influence. Indeed, according to a report done by The Economist, dated June 16th, 2013, Burma has sent 1,500 troops into Bangladesh back in 2010, when Bangladesh was on the brink of collapse. This overall helped them mitigate the potential threats coming in from Pakistan, and overall increased global security, which added to investor confidence and overall brought Bangladesh back onto its feet. Indeed, Bangladesh has also thank the government itself for its actions that have been beneficial for the country. And in this essence, we can clearly see that Bangladesh owes Burma. Now, just exactly what can they do for them? Well, according to Voice of America report, dated May 19th, 2013, we see that the government of Burma is unfit to deal with the catastrophes of Burma, and rather of Burmese religious conflicts, due to the fact that their military is not strategically adjusted to their abilities to mitigate the situation. However, Bangladesh has been known to have dealt with these situations, and therefore Bangladesh military tactics could be beneficial for them, and therefore looking towards their Bangladesh neighbor would in fact be in Burmese political interest. So therefore, when re-examining today's question, how should the government of Burma deal with increase of religious violence? The answer to this question is by adding austerity in the three areas that we discussed. First, through mitigating the media. Secondly, by ousting political leaders of religious provocative groups. And lastly, by not being polarized and isolating itself and looking towards Burma for help militarily. So therefore, it is looking in Burmese best interest to mitigate the situation in the reasons that we discussed. Thank you.